let's take a look at Scandinavia. No idea how I have this tilted. I didn't have a good shot in there. Okay. So like I said, this is one of my Grail games, and the last one that I've obtained, and maybe the last one I really, really want. There's the vast majority, I'd say, of fantasy games are these sort of, I don't know, multiplayer, free diplomacy, fairly simple combat and economics and this, that, and the other. Just sort of an engine to give you this very, very open war game-ish experience. I got a couple that break that mold. Albion, Dark Emperor. They're both two-player. What I don't have is something, a multiplayer that really, well, I don't know if I want to say I don't have, because there are some, like Dragon Hunt. It's a fantasy multiplayer game with armies, and it does break the mold, and it's very different. And you could maybe say that Wizards is very different, although that's more of a quest game than anything else. There's not really armies in it. There were two games I've picked up recently that I had real hopes for on breaking that mold, though, and doing it really well. This is one of them. The other one is Dragon Pass, and I haven't gotten to that yet, but I read it through. Dragon Pass is a two-player game again, though. So this was my big hope for the multiplayer. I don't know what to say I'm looking for. Maybe something like an Empires in Arms, or where diplomacy is constrained and there's this real story driving the whole interactions between the players. I feel like most of these games are so much more balanced in feel and flavor and this, that, and the other than, say, a game of War and Peace is, or a game of Empires of the Middle Ages. There's a handful of good games on specific wars in historical period that really do a very good job, I think, of showing a different specific starting position and showing different national interests and highlighting those within the game itself. Well, this ain't that. This is another of that same class of, yeah, okay, you start off with a couple of territories, very much like Barbarian Kings. You start off with a couple of territories that you get to pick, although there is a historical option. Yeah, historical, whatever. This is pure fantasy. There is no, the only mythological connections are just, the most tenuous. Yes, it uses Norse gods and this, that, and the other, but it doesn't really follow any of the myth of the Norse culture there, beyond some window dressing there. So, what you have is one of those games that you're just sitting there where, I'm the evil player because I have undead things, but that doesn't, constrain me too much. There's a minor constraint. The good players can't kill off each other's main characters. They can't just execute each other. But there's only two good players. There's a lot of richness in terms of the differentiation of the player powers and of the different types of critters. That's just not what I'm looking for. So, when I look at this, I say, okay, great. Not quite what I was hoping for. But it turns out that out of that whole big class of fantasy games, some of which, are almost like Axis and Allies or Britannia, where you just have piles of pieces and you roll buckets of dice for them, and very, very simplistic combat systems, maybe with some, special cards or something in them. I'm thinking here War for the Throne that I played not that long ago. That's kind of neat. Many of them have these interesting factors, but purely on this type of thing, on the fantasy, trying to stick more to the let's not throw in a bunch of cards and weird shit in here. This, I think, is the best in the class, and there's a number of reasons for that. They ate the components. The counters are AWE standard, very, very thin. I have a certain fondness for AWE counters. They clip really nicely, and they're kind of a pain in the ass. They'll slip over. They're very slickery. But, yeah, you can see advertising from the late 80s still infects me somewhere, if you catch that reference. The problem I have is they're difficult to discern. Most especially, the buildings are really hard to tell, but actually some of the numbers on the counters, etc. Maybe it's my eyes. Maybe the old AWE counters are harder for me to discern too. I'm thinking in particular things like EU. I know I had some more trouble. The map is this, again, a computer generated, very beautiful in terms of the colors and the artistic design, and not an unfunctional map. Has all the charts and tables in it. Pretty much readable, even if you don't read French. You can remember the few things that you don't know offhand. These light cardstock, it's like not quite construction paper, but pretty thin. But they serve their purpose. They take up a lot of space. My biggest complaint is, of course, the counters being kind of unreadable. The English rules are really, really tiny. That font is hard to read. Normal photocopy quality. I think I got lucky. No big black smears going through this one. And the original French rules are pretty much the same quality, just larger print. I wouldn't want to try to read that because my French is crappy. All right. But where it does go really, really right. Diplomacy affects a little bit more than just, you can't attack that person and you can give them money. It also generates extra income off the merchant guilds. That's a cute thing. The dragon bidding, just a neat little doodad in the game for no real reason. But it does give a strong defensive benefit to whoever buys it. So it's kind of a cool aspect. Not something to really hook me to the game. Like, if this was Citadels of Ark Lyral and you added that wouldn't be enough to make it a fun game for me. It's an okay game, but there's just nothing there. It's so bland to look at one of them. So far, before this game, I think Barbarian Kings was the best that I had experienced of this type. Taxation. Hey, there's kind of a neat system here where you get to tax at different levels and this whole prosperity system. This adds a lot to the game. It makes it a lot more interesting. The whole economic system. And then all these little buildings that you can construct make it feel kind of like I'm going to say a Civ type game, but to tell you the truth, there were other games like it, Surf City, Ultimate Domain, on the computer, that really had this, okay, so you build this special building and it gives you a special power, and they're available to everyone, and they're just this cool extra expenditure. That aspect of this game is kind of neat too. Where it gets coolest is the recruitment. this is, okay, not necessarily the only coolest thing, but the recruitment where you take a number for the type of unit there, and by the way, this is the only Imperial Guard space. Everything else has, I think, 2 spaces. You have a number for the frequency of the unit, and you're essentially trying to roll under that to obtain a unit of that type. You can pay extra to increase your odds. Your alignment, some of your constructions, these all affect your chances to get it. And the more you take, the more your chances decrease. Okay, that's kind of cool because most games, you just buy whatever the hell you want. But in this one, you make a commitment to pay a certain amount and then you roll the dice and see if you get it. And if you get it, you have to pay. Also, there's the effect on the prosperity. Your tax base is getting reduced for every critter that you build under the normal mechanisms. And finally, if it gets low enough, you can't build any more critters. That works really, really neat. That had some very cool effects on it. You know, if you're a miser like me, you tend to try to get away without paying extra for critters, especially in the back areas, you know. I'll bring these up later. You also don't want to build all your units in one area necessarily because that will degrade your tax performance, and you got to figure out ways around that. Now, collecting taxes can be done in 2 ways in the game. One is all your territories collect at the same rate. And the other is you get to individually pick. The individually picking would be a nightmare, I think, in terms of, I don't know. It would mean making a decision on each territory as opposed to simply and calculating each territory. So I don't think it would be a nightmare, but it would be a little bit of a hassle. But what bugged me about it is it seemed less realistic. Usually you don't tax at different rates, I think. Usually what you say is, yeah, I'm taxing or I'm not. I did want to, though, separate the pillage or plunder option out of the others. So when I first saw an option to pillage, where somebody really wanted to do that to start wrecking the land, I let them do that individually. Because the goal there is no longer a general kingdom-wide taxation. And you could make arguments either way about the realism. But it worked pretty well without distributing. It makes the choice a little harder. If you can distribute, you can say, this area is fine, I'll tax this at level 3, but this one could use a little bit of economic boost, I'll tax it less. And certainly the US does that. I went into that earlier, whatever. Okay. So after recruitment, you get to build assets, which is mainly the buildings, but also the boats. The boats are kind of cool. They add another factor to this whole thing. Most games of this type have sort of a counter mix per kingdom or whatever. So if you're one of these areas, that area has its own little counter mix maybe, or whatever. But here, kind of like Barbarian Kings, which I liked in that too, you have a counter mix, and sometimes a player just has a counter mix. Here you had a counter mix based on the racial type or the critter type, and there are more than one area with each critter type. Really, really neat. I like the effects of that, where you're competing for the counters, and once all the counters are gone, and that makes initiative kind of an interesting thing. It's not clear whether you want to go first or second. There's an option in that I didn't play with, which was the initiative player gets to choose the entire ordering of all the players for each turn. For each phase, actually, not just for the turn. That seemed like it would irritate me in solo. It might be cool in a post game, though. I'm not sure. It's a lot of power. Then you go to the military phase, and the military phase is pretty standard. Again, 2 options. Do you want to play this game as an area game? In which case, there's a lot less kind of interesting little movement options through the terrain. But to tell you the truth, when the terrain is added, you usually don't have an ability to defend, along the border or something like that. There's no zones of control. There's no interception. So you put a piece here, well, I'll just go around you, right? So generally you end up defending in the capital, but the thing is, if both people are in capitals, quite often those capitals are not within striking distance of each other. These two happen to be, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these two are not. Although actually the horses can reach here, but the humans can't reach here. Some critters have higher movement allowance. The two games are not the same. If you play with the areas, you have much, much heavier movement. Like things that can move 2 areas can move much, much further than things that can move that have the same unit in the hex game. In the hex game, that unit goes up from a 4 to a 6-point movement allowance. And then the third movement area is a 9. 9 barely gets you across an area. It will not get you from one capital through an area to a second capital. So you don't even have a 2 movement point allowance in the area advance with a 3 movement point allowance translated over to hexes. Totally different games, very different feels, I would assume. I've played a lot of area-based games in the fantasy realm. I kind of wanted to try this one with hexes. I had a worry that it wouldn't matter with the hexes, but it does. It's a big deal. And I could see going either way with that. And now you have to pay unit maintenance. And you could say, well, that's kind of irritating at the end of the turn. Shouldn't you be doing this in your economic phase when you're buying units, you pay maintenance? That would be easier. You would be able to judge whether or not you have the money fairly easily. The thing is, it's hard to tell how much money you're gonna need in the maintenance phase. It is possible. I'm not just talking about a failure to calculate here. You don't know whether or not your army is going to exist at the maintenance phase. You don't know if it's going to be, sitting out where you put it and it's going to cost you, or if it's going to be just destroyed. And it's even worse if you're the necromancer because, well, if you get in a fight, you don't know whether or not your army's going to cost anything even if you win. Because you might win and have a pile of undead there instead of all the critters that cost maintenance. I want to look a little at the units. So each unit has its own special roles, and some of these are very cool, like the humans being able to build up the prosperity in an area. That's very weird. Things like dwarves and orcs that you can pay to make better. Dwarves permanently, orcs just for a battle. Every single thing, I think, has some special ability. There's cheap units that become as good as normal units under circumstances. So like the goblins become, well, not quite normal units, but if they have numerical superiority, they become a little better. The elflings become as good as just about any normal unit if they're facing chaotic critters. Then you got sort of these exceptional things that are expensive and powerful. We never saw a Valkyrie show up in the game. They come from a couple of events. They have a healing ability if they don't fight. The power of the undead, well, that's really more an aspect of the necromancer. If the necromancer's not in the game, I'm not even sure undead will show up. Well, they can show up through the Cert's transformation. Boy, was that a bit of randomness. So that's another thing in this game, is you have this whole random events table. And I don't know, we didn't get through. There's a good number of these we did not get through. We didn't hit. So they add a lot of these weird little things. Some of them are crazy weird, like all the units transforming into different units. Some of them are pretty mellow. Storms, good harvest, improves prosperity, simple stuff then. The characters themselves, I can't really speak too much as to... Okay, so here's another option you have, which I of course played with, which is actually having a lord on the table, and that lord gives you a special bonus. However, if you lose that lord, you lose the game. The special bonuses for those lords, I don't know how huge any of them are. In a way, I think maybe the best of those goes to the merchant Milok, which is getting 50% more gold during the tax phase from his areas. That's a huge increase if he gets to be decent sized. There's people get free units. Orkan's power of being able to get permanent faith for killing off other players, their lords, is kind of nice. These guys also have their own special captive rules, and this sets up a whole set of rules that includes one of the cooler things in the game, which is subjugation. If you capture somebody, you can force them to be your slave for the rest of the game, basically. We saw that with Yurik, we saw that with Milok. The actual powers for the leaders, the base powers that you have, whether or not you take the Lord option, well, those are definitely a mixed bag. So I look, for example, at Orkan's abilities, and at the low level, they're not that terrific. He can increase his own production of units. He can double a unit in combat eventually. And then he can screw with an opponent's production. And he could kill off an entire area at the 4th level. That's pretty potent. That may be, but he can't use that where the Lord is. An enemy Lord. That could be the last couple very, very powerful if he gets to that level. He didn't find himself able to use it the 1 or 2 turns where he had the level 4 level. He used the Cursed Waters to level 3 a couple of times, and it wasn't tremendously potent for him. Krosan the Necromancer, this is the most powerful. Just his core ability. When he loses a fight, his lost units raise again. Okay, actually it's when he wins a fight. His lost units will raise again, turned into undead units. That is an incredible factor. He does not lose units when he wins a fight. That's just, until he uses up his whole undead countermix, which isn't going to happen easily unless it's a small number of players. His 2nd level boosts his undead to 4 strength points. That's a pretty big across-the-board bonus. The one I keep forgetting, he's able to summon units undead whenever he captures an area. And then the ultimate necromancy, I made a big deal about this, and it's been pretty hefty. It wins him battles he has no right to win sometimes. But it's less valuable than his core abilities. Now, unlike Orkan and Meirith, who we'll get to next, Krosan doesn't have, and most of the players don't have to pay for their ability. These are just automatic things that happen whenever their units engage. Meirith is the elf. He's got the ability to call on forest troops to fight for him at the lowest level. That costs him magic, though. They're a minor bonus there. I missed one of his bonuses because it's not listed with his other bonuses. He gets a +1 when he recruits elves in Glorian and Illyria, the two. I don't think Illyria is an elven area. So that's kind of interesting. They made me Jellin. Doppelganger lets him spawn another of a same type of unit. I didn't use that much, but it's kind of cool with your bonus, your big units like your Pegasi or your Giants. It also doesn't cost against the territory. Inversion, he gets to take an enemy unit onto his side. Boy, that can be huge in a battle, switching something's side. And then this temporal paralysis, that's the one I kept using because I had so much magic power. it freezes an area and takes it out of play. And that's only really important when somebody's kicking ass, when there's somebody you really want to halt and prevent their troops from taking an effect. Milok is the merchant. His base is double the trade. Now that's a big deal if he makes a lot of alliances, but it's a really big deal if he gets big. He never got big enough. He got big enough for it to matter, but he never got big enough for it to become an overwhelming advantage. Again, his level 1 is quite potent, potential, but not like Chryson's. Being able to build assets and sell assets both at 7. The low wages, I didn't get to see that much. Definitely reducing the cost of his armies, though, and that's what it does, is a nice deal. And then trading with the enemy, being able to buy off enemy units with gold, not quite as powerful as getting them to switch sides. Urik's great ability is, and we never saw him get very far, is he has, his heroes are double their value. That's pretty potent too. But then his next one is Seawolf, which is kind of like, okay, cheaper Drakens and they go a little faster. I mean, it's kind of cool, but it's not big. The third one, Plunder, is kind of neat. You don't need to build a castle in order to plunder an area. So if you lose the castle from an area or whatever and you want to denude it of value, you can do that pretty easily. Not something you want to do early in the game probably, because you want to hold your territories that you get. But later in the game, as we see, unbalances can kind of occur on fronts, and you might want to do a scorched earth tactic. And the final one is Berserk, which is doubling units for killing them. This is what I thought Orcum had, but it's not. Sandra's powers are kind of weird, because hers come from her legitimate right to the throne. So she gets the support of the villagers, an extra combat point in her favor, even if she's attacking, it reduces from them. The second one is they'll build an asset per turn, but only if there aren't many assets in the area. And that, from my play, doesn't look like it ever happens. No asset being destroyed. That's just castles and fortified walls. You know, maybe I was playing that wrong. No, they're... Yeah. Shit, I was playing wrong all along. So yeah, castles and fortified walls should be automatically destroyed. And there's a 50% chance of other things being destroyed. I played that wrong and only did 50% for castles and fortified walls. But anyway, she doesn't destroy anything, so that's actually a little better than under the rules I was playing for some reason. And then finally, Royal Aura, she just gets extra units in every area. And this is without reducing the prosperity. She has to get to level 4 for that, though, and it may be hard for someone with a weak power to get there in an early game of this. Basically, when players are inexperienced, that's kind of the thing. If you sit down at a game like this and you kind of expect it to be balanced, and you find out, like I did, geez, the Necromancer really kicks ass. His power's huge. It may be too late to turn around and cancel him out. And someone like Sandra, well, unless people are kind of letting her advance well, because they're fighting the Necromancer more heavily or whatever, it's going to be hard for her to reach that level 4 power level. All right. Anyway, I'm quite pleased with it. It's, again, not quite what I hoped it to be, but I like to think of it as the best in the class of all of those fantasy games where things are fairly loose as to alliances, as to goals. You know, it's a conquer the world or get so many areas and whatever type of thing, where everybody's kind of competing for the same goal. That may be part of it, is the same goal aspect. It almost feels like, well, Sandra's trying to take everybody under control, but the elf may not. Maybe it doesn't make sense for the elf to be trying to establish an empire in the same way that it is for Sandra, or maybe for Orcam. And maybe Lord Kreger has very different goals, which might require that he conquer areas, but that he does something with them. Anyway, that's kind of my... the general engine of this game is as good as it gets for these kind of games. And it's got some very innovative pieces that really excite me. Some of the external, beyond the conquer the world, or at least, a certain number of provinces. One thing is, I tripled the length of the game by playing it well past when it legally ended by the rules to a complete finish. One person actually has such a domination victory. One thing this has done, and I brought this up in a couple of places through the playthroughs, is these ideas for how to make it, even more of the game I want. So, for example, the magic maybe having an experience system, kind of like Barbarian Kings does, where you can learn new abilities, or maybe where you can create a character with a mix of abilities, if you don't necessarily like the focused characters. Just a bunch of stuff that I wanted to kind of throw into this. Maybe some quests, I don't know. All kinds of ideas that could come into play. If I didn't have tons and tons of games, this was my only fantasy game or whatever, I might devote a huge amount of effort into making this into something really cool and tailored to me. Luckily though, or unfortunately, however you want to take it, I got lots and lots of things that I can play what the designer intended and keep discovering new stuff that way. Even new stuff that I've already played. Alright, so yeah, like I said, best of class for that kind of fantasy game. Definitely worth the inflated price that it tends to achieve on the market due to its rarity. And, AWE impresses me with a lot of their games. Up it goes.